Welcome back to the Go-Karts and Good Times YouTube channel. Today we're going to be pulling the mini bike out, and hopefully by the end of this video I'll be able to say it's complete. With the old rear tire popped and still no brakes, I've got a lot of work ahead of me. If you think the garage looks different, it's because it is. I spent a couple long nights a few weeks back to clean this place up and get it finally organized. Out with the old and in with the new. You may notice that this is a tubeless tire and I plan to run a tube, but I think it'll be fine because at most it'll generate a little bit more friction and wear out the tube a little bit faster. You might also be able to tell that this new tire is a little bit wider than the original one, 1 inch to be exact, and I have a plan for this. Well, I could have found a tire that was meant to go with the tube. This one checked all other boxes, being cheap and having good tread for the backyard and street. To accommodate the larger, meatier tire, I purchased some inexpensive aluminum spacers on McMaster Car to go between the two halves of the rim. While this is a little bit unorthodox, I think it'll give me the grip I want and help the bike handle better with the torquey Tecumseh motor. All that's left to do is pull the rear axle and start working. With the wheel off, I can now zip off these nuts and take a look inside. After struggling with a minute, it seems that even with an impact driver, I'll have to get some kind of wrench on the other side of the bolts that hold the rim together. While it's a little bit savage, I think I'll be using the angle grinder to cut off the old tire. It is garbage anyway, and I'm not trying to save it. Creating quite a mess, the rim is finally exposed, and I probably should have looked it up on how to take this off before I started because I thought it'd be easier, but it's done. Now you can see just how gross the inside of this tire and tube was. Like the tire, I have no intention on saving this hardware, so I think what I'll be doing is cutting a slit in the end of these bolts so that I can grab on it with a flathead screwdriver and then using a wrench to turn them free, because with the impact driver they just continue to spin. As it turns out, that didn't really work at all. So I guess instead I'll just be chopping the ends of these bolts off completely. While maybe not the best solution, all of the bolts are removed with minimal damage to the rim. And while not separated, I think I should be able to split the two pieces. With the rim split apart, you can now see how exactly I want to make it wider with these spacers. Using my rigged up Harbor Freight press here, I'm going to try and separate the sprocket from the half of the rim. And it's a success. With all three pieces separated, I think I'm going to call it a night and come back tomorrow to clean them up or paint. While I'm at it, I think I'm also going to replace the bearing, which will take a few days to get here in the mail. I'm again going to make good use of the press here to get out this bearing. For round 2. These bearings definitely aren't bad for their age, but it's definitely time to get new ones. After a thorough cleaning, I can even read the letters on the bearings. 2 days later, and I have everything I'll need. My next step is stripping these parts clean before painting. While the rim does look a lot better, it still needs to be washed off, and I think it needs a more harsh cleaning on the wire wheel. While they're nowhere near perfect, at least they're clean and have all loose rust and paint knocked off. First going to be treating the parts with Rust Fix, and then I'm going to be going over them with their colors. I want to make the hub black and the rims white so that they match the front rim of the mini bike. I'm waiting for these to dry before I can put on the next coat, I'm gonna get to breaking open these packages. The nice thing about the kit I ordered is that they expect you to cut it to the length you want and then crimp on ends, so it comes with the various different ends you may need, which will help later down the line when I have to trim it to fit the mini bike. As you can see here, my bearings came with snap rings on them. This is because they're a common go-kart size, but I'll be removing these so that I can put them on the back rim of the mini bike. While not the best option, a clutch brake is the most simple way for us to add brakes to the mini bike. What I'll be doing is creating a bracket and mounting a stud to the engine using the threaded holes in the side of the block. Then, using our brake line, I'll create a bracket on the frame that allows me to squeeze the brake shoe around the clutch. Unfortunately, the can says to wait 24 hours before putting color on these parts, so I'll have to wait overnight before coming back and finishing them up. With these pieces cut and arranged correctly, I can now weld them up. While they're not great, these welds are pretty good for flux core and they'll be plenty good enough to hold on the brake shoe. All that's left to do is to test fit this with the brake and the clutch on to see where I want to put the stud, weld it up, and hit it with a coat of spray paint. Back for another day. I realized that up until now I called the brake band a brake shoe incorrectly. And I also realized, looking at a couple examples of other people doing this online, that I really want to mount it like this and have my stud at the end here and have the mount for the brake cable be the same mount that holds the brake band. It's a lot more simple this way and I don't have to add a bracket to the frame. I'll be sorting the brake out this weekend, but in the meantime it's been 24 hours and I can add more coats of paint. In total, I think I want to have 3 coats of paint on these parts because they'll be facing a lot of wear and tear. But I'm not going to film every coat because it'll get redundant and boring. With some measurements taken, I can now cut my pieces to size. With this bolt, I was able to hammer the head directly into the section of tube I welded onto the bracket. Again, all I have to do is weld it up. A few coats later, and you can really tell that these didn't turn out too badly despite the extremely pitted surface. Even though there's some crazy texture on the hub and sprocket assembly, this black looks a heck of a lot better than the originally rusty surface. With the paint dry, I can now press in my new bearings. After a trip to Tractor Supply, I have all the hardware I need for reassembly. In addition to getting hardware for the wheel, I also got hardware to replace the bolts that hold on the foot pegs. Not only is this hardware stronger, but the addition of a lock nut ensures that it will never rattle off. With all this, I'm now ready to start reassembling the rear wheel. One thing that I almost forgot to mention is that I picked hardware to fit the sized holes of the rim and not my spacers. So I will have to remount the holes in the spacers to fit the hardware. Unfortunately, with the hardware I have, I can't continue working on the rim tonight. Yes, I do know the old adage, measure twice, cut once, but even I neglect this sometimes, and it ends up hurting me in the long run. As you can see, the hardware I got for the brake is spot on, and you can see how I want it to function now, with the cable going through the bolt, squeezing the 2 ends of the brake band to slow you down. After another trip to the hardware store, I finally have what I need, but you can see this hardware isn't going to fit. What I've been putting off for a while is entertaining the idea of cutting access holes on the front side of the sprocket to fit a thin wall socket in to tighten up these bolts and so that I can actually put them through the holes. I didn't want to do this because it'll be a lot of time of drilling, and I'll be modifying a sprocket in a way that I didn't want to. But after all, this thing is pretty tough and pretty thick, and I think it should be fine in the end, even though it will be a big pain in the butt to do. Despite it being my least favorite option, it is now time to start cutting the holes for the access windows. I'm going to try to mark from this side and drill a pilot hole, and then use a stepper bit to enlarge the hole from the other side. That was a colossal pain in the butt. At least you can see that now I can get a socket on the back side of the hardware to tighten up the rim, and the hardware will actually be able to fit through the holes instead of being stuck between the two sides here. At this point in the video, I have to acknowledge that it has been super all over the place. First, because I haven't been careful with my measurements, and because this is kind of uncharted territory and I'm making stuff up as I go. I'm just realizing now that I really don't have to drill a hole in this bolt and can just thread the cable underneath the bolt, especially since this bolt is not that thick and doesn't have a lot of thickness to spare. By drilling a hole in it, it might get weak and fail. What I can say is with this paint dry, I can finally put the wheel together. Just like that, the wheel is finally assembled. While the tire isn't fully seated and there's no air in it, I think the tire should settle when I do put the air in it, which is what I'm going to do now. Unfortunately, I'm experiencing an unforeseen problem. I know it's really stupid to think, wow, of course it's going to push through around the spacers, but I didn't even think of this when I started the project. So I think what I'll have to do is wrap a strap of metal around the spacers, or I'll have to 3D print a ring that the spacers drop into so that the tube does not push between them and deform. That's a wrap for tonight. Hopefully I can CAD up a 3D printed puck to put in here and hold the spacers and prevent the tube from deforming, and then make the brake cable for the brakes tomorrow. While I'm waiting for my spacer to finish 3D printing, I can make up the brake cable and get the brakes working. The mini bike has brakes. Even though the brake band is a little bit tight, I think it'll be fine. And considering that the brake lever from the bicycle doesn't have that long of a throw anyway, I think the spacing is just perfect for the bike. With this spacer made, I can finally turn this pile of parts into a functional rear wheel. While it may not be perfect, the wheel is finally assembled, so now it's time to air it up, hopefully for the last time. Time to give it a try. It's good to me. All that's left is to snug up these bolts and put it on the mini bike. All that's left to do now is reassemble the rear axle. Done, and the mini bike looks much better with the wider rear tire on it that fits the frame better and the amount of power it has. Even though it's kind of late, the last thing to do is take it for a rip and test it out. said and done, this thing rides great. Even though it's pretty harsh on the bumps, this rear wheel helps out a lot with handling and grip. Without someone to film, it is a little bit hard to get riding shots, but I tried my best. At the end of the day, I'm extremely happy with the mini bike, and hopefully it'll be featured in an upcoming riding video with my go-kart and my friend's go-kart. I do also want to put in lots more work on this soon. That's all for now, and thank you for watching. If you liked the video, I'd appreciate it if you liked, commented, or even subscribed. Hopefully you're staying safe and taking advantage of this beautiful weather.